The galaxy's smartest species gathered to prove their intellectual supremacy, with puzzles so complex they were deemed statistically impossible to solve. 3 alien geniuses failed spectacularly, their advanced minds crumbling under the pressure. Then humanity sent their representative, a 9-year-old boy with a juice box and a cracked smartphone. You know how some places just scream, "We're smarter than you"? Cerebrus Prime was that place, dialed up to galactic scale. The whole station floated in orbit around a pulsar, not for power but for the dramatic lighting effect. Every surface was either polished crystal or shimmering hologram, and the air hummed with the sound of self-satisfaction. This wasn't just a research facility, it was a monument to intellectual vanity. The High Council that ran the place viewed failure as entertainment, like some cosmic reality show where contestants' entire philosophical frameworks got dismantled for ratings. They had viewing galleries where delegates from 100 species would sip exotic beverages and place bets on which genius would crack first. 3 alien judges sat at the center of it all, each representing the absolute peak of their species' cognitive abilities. You had the crystalline Luxarian who processed light like data, the 6-limbed calculator from the Arithmetic Collective, and the energy being from the Voltaic Confederation. They didn't just think they were smart, they considered themselves the definition of intelligence itself. They announced their grand competition with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. The puzzles weren't just difficult, they were designed to be fundamentally unsolvable. The statistical probability of success stood at a laughable 0.0001%, a number they quoted with reverence, like it was some sacred text. This wasn't really about testing intelligence, it was a performance of intellectual arrogance. The whole setup screamed that only gods of thought need apply, and even they would probably fail. The stage was set for what they assumed would be a magnificent display of galactic hubris, where everyone could admire how brilliantly impossible their creations were. What they didn't realize was they'd built the perfect trap for their own minds. They'd become so enamored with complexity that they celebrated it for its own sake, like chefs who only care about how many ingredients they can cram into a dish, not whether it actually tastes good. They'd forgotten that the point of a puzzle isn't to be impressive, it's to be solved. Which brings us to the first contestant, already walking toward what everyone assumed would be his spectacular public failure. So Admiral Zephyr of the Luxarian steps up first, and he moves like someone who's never been anything but the smartest person in the room. His entire species communicates through intricate light patterns that dance across the crystalline facets of their bodies. It's like watching living stained glass trying to solve a math problem. He approaches the first puzzle, something they called the paradox maze, with the unshakable confidence of someone who's spent centuries mastering multi-dimensional perception. You could see it in the way his facets glowed, steady and purposeful. He believed his mind could process 12 separate streams of data at once, like a conductor leading an orchestra of dimensions. The maze itself was a monstrosity of overthought design. Paths didn't just bend, they rewrote themselves based on whether you were looking at them. Corridors blinked in and out of existence depending on your angle of observation. It was the kind of thing you build when you care more about showing off than actually creating a solvable challenge. Zephyr's facets began flickering almost immediately, like a fiber optic cable having a nervous breakdown. He was trying to hold the entire structure in his mind all at once, every shifting plane and conditional pathway. The light patterns across his surface sped up, shifting from calm blues and golds to frantic oranges and jagged whites. You could see the strain building. His facets weren't just flickering now. They were stuttering like a corrupted video file trying to play 12 different resolutions simultaneously. The council watched, not with concern but with clinical interest, as if they were observing a particularly interesting chemical reaction. Then the lights began to dim. Not all at once, but in sections like a city having a rolling blackout. The brilliant patterns across his body faded to dull grays, then to near darkness. For a species that communicates through light, this was the equivalent of a complete system crash. He stood there, completely dark, a statue of failed ambition. The first genius had been defeated by his own need to perceive everything at once. He couldn't accept that some things aren't meant to be seen directly, that sometimes the solution requires you to not look so hard. The maze was designed to punish exactly his kind of hyper-awareness, and it worked perfectly. But the show had to go on. The council members made notes on their holographic pads, completely unfazed. They'd seen this before or something like it. Failure was just data to them. Another point on the graph of intellectual limitation. They activated the reset sequence on the maze, the pathways shimmering back into their impossible starting positions, ready for the next contestant to fail in a slightly different way. Meanwhile, Professor Glitch of the Arithmetical Collective takes his turn. His 6 arms move in a constant blur, sketching equations in the air that hang there glowing, a web of numbers and symbols that would make most species' brains hurt just to look at. He doesn't walk so much as compute his way forward, each step perfectly calculated for optimal efficiency. He looks at the paradox maze and sees exactly what he expected, a problem to be solved through pure mathematical force. His arms accelerate, generating solutions at a rate that would melt a supercomputer. Formulas bloom around him like firework displays, each one more elegant and complex than the last. The air hums with the energy of his calculations, a symphony of pure logic. But the maze isn't a math problem. It's a perceptual paradox, built on the principle that some things can't be solved by staring directly at them. The more equations he generates, the more contradictions appear. For every solution his upper right arm produces, his lower left arm creates a counterproof that invalidates it. The beautiful web of numbers begins to tangle, equations crashing into each other like bumper cars. His arms start working against each other, creating feedback loops of pure logic. The left side tries to simplify while the right side complicates, the upper arms optimizing what the lower arms just made obsolete. It's like watching someone try to build a house while another person keeps redesigning the blueprints mid-construction. The glowing equations flicker and warp, numbers morphing into impossible shapes. He begins muttering prime numbers in multiple languages, a sure sign of system failure in his species. 2, 3, 5, 7. The words come out in a desperate rhythm, like a computer trying to reboot itself through verbal commands. His arms aren't coordinating anymore. They're twitching independently, scratching partial solutions that immediately erase themselves. The council watches all this with academic fascination, not concern. They make notes on their holographic pads, murmuring to each other about interesting failure modes and computational limits. They're treating this like a particularly engaging lecture demonstration, completely detached from the fact that they're watching a mind come apart at the seams. Pure calculation proved useless against a puzzle that requires you to not look at it directly. The maze was designed to defeat exactly this approach. The harder you try to solve it through force of logic, the more it resists. Professor Glitch didn't just fail. He demonstrated why failure was inevitable for anyone using his methods. That was the moment they should have realized their mistake. They'd built a test that only worked if you approached thinking itself the wrong way. They'd created the intellectual equivalent of a door that only opens if you don't try to turn the knob. But instead of questioning their assumptions, they just reset the maze again and made notes about interesting cognitive limitations. The show, after all, had to go on, and there was still one more contestant waiting to fail in what they assumed would be an equally entertaining fashion. Then comes Commander Flux of the Voltaic Confederation. His species doesn't have physical bodies in the usual sense. They're living energy fields, pure consciousness shaped into something vaguely humanoid for diplomatic convenience. He floats toward the maze like a storm cloud that's decided to become sentient and take up advanced mathematics. He believes he can bypass the maze's tricks by becoming one with its quantum state. Where the Luxarian tried to observe everything and the calculator tried to solve everything, Flux intends to be everything. His plan is to exist in all dimensions of the maze simultaneously, like someone trying to win a board game by becoming the board itself. The energy field that forms his body begins to glow brighter as he engages with the puzzle. At first it's a steady, confident luminescence, the kind you might see from a properly functioning reactor. But then the intensity starts building beyond normal parameters. What was a controlled glow becomes a harsh glare, like a star going through some kind of identity crisis. Sparks of uncontrolled energy begin crackling across the chamber. They jump from his form to the crystal walls, leaving temporary scorch marks that fade almost immediately. The air smells like ozone and ambition. You can hear the energy discharge, sharp pops and sizzles that echo in the vast chamber. The council's holographic displays start flickering from the interference. Their important data streams and self-congratulatory statistics blink in and out of existence like bad reception on an old television. Some of the delegates in the viewing gallery actually lean back in their seats, not out of fear exactly, but with the cautious respect you might show a pot of water that's starting to boil over. He doesn't just fail the way the others did. He overloads. The brilliant energy field that was Commander Flux brightens to an almost painful intensity, then collapses inward on itself. What's left is a dim, confused flicker hovering where he'd been, like a light bulb that's moments from burning out completely. He just hovers there, faint and disoriented, a being of pure energy who's just short-circuited his own consciousness. 3 supposed geniuses, 3 spectacular public failures, the Luxarian who couldn't stop observing, the calculator who couldn't stop calculating, and the energy being who tried to become the puzzle itself. They'd each approached the maze with the absolute peak of their species' cognitive abilities, and each had been defeated by their own specialties. The council makes notes, resetting the maze for what they assume will be another failure. They don't seem concerned that they've just witnessed 3 of the galaxy's greatest minds come apart at the seams. To them, it's just more data points in their study of intellectual limits. They haven't considered that maybe the test itself is flawed, that they've created something that only works if you think about thinking in exactly the wrong way. The viewing gallery murmurs with excitement. They've gotten exactly what they came for, a show of spectacular failure performed by beings who were supposed to be beyond failure. The betting pools settle up, with some delegates collecting their winnings while others grumble about unexpected outcomes. The whole station hums with the satisfaction of an entertainment spectacle delivered as promised. Which brings us to humanity's turn. The council probably expects another hyper-specialized genius, another specimen to place in their collection of impressive failures. They haven't considered that humanity might approach this whole situation differently. They're about to learn that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't more complexity, it's recognizing when complexity itself is the problem. You know how in every competition there's that one wild card entry that doesn't play by the rules? Humanity's representative, Dr. Rebecca Nova, had been standing off to the side this whole time with a look of quiet amusement. She watched 3 galactic geniuses fail spectacularly while sipping something that looked suspiciously like Earth-style coffee from a thermal mug. She didn't seem worried or impressed, just patiently waiting her turn like someone who knows the punchline to a joke nobody else has heard yet. The alien council expected another hyper-specialized genius. They were prepared for some new flavor of intellectual spectacle. Maybe a being who could manipulate time or calculate probabilities in their sleep. They had their holographic notepads ready to document another fascinating failure mode. The whole chamber hummed with anticipation, the crystalline walls reflecting their eager faces. Then Dr. Nova stepped forward and delivered the line that would change everything. She announced she hadn't come to compete herself, but had brought along a consultant to provide what she called the human perspective. The council members exchanged glances. They'd expected advanced neural interfaces or quantum computation devices, not a consultant. The doors parted with the kind of dramatic galactic fanfare these beings loved, swirling light patterns, harmonic tones that vibrated through the floor, holographic projections that would make a Hollywood premiere look amateur. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the entrance, expecting. Well, nobody knew what to expect, but certainly not what they got. And there stood Tommy Martinez, 9 years old, wearing a slightly too big Star Wars shirt with what looked like toothpaste on the sleeve. He held a juice box in one hand and a bag of half-crushed crackers in the other. He blinked at the dazzling lights and glittering alien, faces like someone who'd just woken up from a nap and found himself in the wrong movie. His first question to the most advanced beings in the known galaxy wasn't about the competition, the puzzles, or the cosmic significance of the moment. He squinted up at the towering crystalline judges and asked, "Do you guys have Wi-Fi? My mom said I could play games if there's Wi-Fi." The council members just stared. Some of their facial facets actually stopped shimmering for a moment. The Luxarian judge's light patterns flickered in what might have been confusion. The energy being that was Commander Flux dimmed slightly, like a light bulb encountering a concept it couldn't process. Dr. Nova kept her same amused expression, like a parent watching their child ask a celebrity for an extra cookie. She didn't explain or apologize, just let the moment hang there while Tommy took a loud sip from his juice box. The intellectual hierarchy of the universe was about to meet a snack-time problem solver. They'd spent centuries perfecting tests of supreme intelligence, building monuments to their own cognitive brilliance, and creating puzzles that required godlike mental abilities. They were completely unprepared for someone whose primary concerns were internet access and not spilling his crackers. But the aliens didn't know that yet. They saw a child, not a different way of thinking. They saw immaturity, not a cognitive toolkit optimized for practical problem solving. They were still operating under the assumption that intelligence meant complexity, that wisdom meant abstraction, that solving required straining. The viewing gallery murmured with confusion. Some delegates seemed offended, others merely curious. The betting pools suddenly got very interesting, with odds shifting dramatically as people tried to calculate what this meant. The whole carefully constructed atmosphere of intellectual superiority developed its first crack, though nobody recognized it yet. They reset the paradox maze one more time, the pathways shimmering back into their impossible configurations. The judges took their positions, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the small human now wandering toward the center of the chamber. Tommy was more interested in whether his juice box was almost empty than the cosmic significance of the test before him. He was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't more power. It's recognizing when you're trying too hard. So the galaxy's greatest minds are all staring at a child who's currently more interested in the crumbs at the bottom of his snack bag than the cosmic significance of the moment. The paradox maze shimmers behind him, its 12-dimensional architecture twisting in ways that would give most species existential vertigo. Tommy just squints at it like he's trying to decide whether to finish his crackers now or save them for later. He's utterly unbothered by the weight of expectations. While the previous contestants approach this like a sacred intellectual ritual, Tommy's concerns are immediate and practical. He turns to the nearest council member, a being whose crystalline body probably contains more processing power than Earth's entire satellite network, and asks if they have any cookies. Not exotic alien delicacies, specifically the kind with chocolate chips that his mom sometimes buys. Then he mentions he's getting hungry, which in his mind is clearly a more pressing issue than solving an impossible puzzle. He's not trying to be disrespectful. He just operates on a different set of priorities. His internal clock is telling him it's probably snack time back home, and the universe's definition of intelligence isn't going to change that. The aliens are completely baffled by this lack of reverence for their grand intellectual theater. They've spent centuries building this moment, designing tests that would showcase the pinnacle of cognitive achievement. And here's their final contestant negotiating for baked goods. The Luxarian judge's light patterns flicker in what might be confusion or maybe just indigestion. The energy being that was Commander Flux dims slightly like a light bulb encountering a concept it can't compute. They see a child, small, messy, apparently distracted. What they don't see is the cognitive toolkit that humanity accidentally perfected through millions of years of evolution. They don't recognize that a mind trained on playground politics, video game puzzles, and negotiating for extra dessert might have exactly the right software for this particular problem. They're looking at immaturity when they should be looking at adaptability. Dr. Nova just smiles from the sidelines, sipping her coffee. She's not intervening or explaining. She's got that look parents get when they know their kid is about to do something surprisingly effective, through methods no adult would consider. She didn't bring Tommy because he's a genius in their terms. She brought him because he doesn't think in their terms at all. Tommy finally looks at the dazzling, impossible paradox maze, but he doesn't see insurmountable complexity or a testament to intellectual achievement. He sees a puzzle, and not even a particularly interesting one at that. It's just another thing between him and whatever snack might come next. He approaches it with the same mild curiosity he'd give to a new level in a mobile game. He doesn't see 12 dimensions. He sees a pathfinding problem. He doesn't perceive quantum state fluctuations. He recognizes pattern recognition. The maze was designed to defeat hyper-specialized intelligence, but it never accounted for someone who'd approach it with the casual efficiency of a kid trying to finish his homework before dinner. That was the moment the paradigm began to shift, though nobody in the chamber realized it yet. The cracks in their understanding of intelligence started forming not with a grand revelation, but with a child's simple reframing of the problem. They'd been so focused on building the perfect test of supreme intellect that they never considered what might happen when someone treated their masterpiece like just another item on the afternoon's to-do list, the viewing gallery murmured, some delegates leaning forward while others exchanged puzzled glances. The betting pool shifted again, though nobody was quite sure what they were betting on anymore. The whole carefully constructed atmosphere of intellectual superiority developed another hairline fracture, this one running a little deeper than the last. Tommy took a final sip of his juice box, the straw making that hollow gurgling sound that means it's almost empty. He shook the box experimentally, then looked from the impossible maze to the alien judges with the expression that clearly said he hoped this wouldn't take too long. He had priorities, and solving cosmic puzzles was currently ranking somewhere below finding a refill. I mean, what would you use to solve an impossible maze? The aliens expected some bespoke, hyper-advanced technological interface. Maybe a neural link headset that translates quantum states into pretty lights, or a crystalline data slate that can model 12 dimensions in real time. They were prepared for the kind of hardware that gets developed in secret labs over centuries, with polished surfaces and glowing runes and probably a dramatic name like the Omni-Cognitive Accelerator. Instead, Tommy pulls out a cracked smartphone with cartoon stickers on the case. One sticker's peeling at the corner, and there's what looks like dried jam near the charging port. It's not some prototype fresh from a cutting-edge laboratory. It's a well-used device from Earth, the kind you'd find in any middle-class household. Probably a couple of models behind the latest release because kids are tough on electronics. He taps the screen, swiping past game icons and what might be homework reminders. The aliens watch, their various forms of expression ranging from confusion to something approaching horror. The crystalline judge's facets flicker in a pattern that probably translates to, "Is this some kind of joke?" The energy being that was Commander Flux dims and brightens erratically, like a confused porch light. He opens a maze solver app he downloaded for homework help last semester. The icon shows a cute cartoon mouse looking puzzled. The app was free with ads that play if you want hints. It was designed for basic 2D paper mazes, the kind you find in children's activity books or restaurant placemats. The interface is simple, just a grid with a start point and an exit, with tools to mark paths and avoid dead ends. The alien council members exchange glances that would be hilarious if they weren't so earnest. They designed a test that supposedly required 12-dimensional consciousness, the ability to perceive shifting quantum states, and the cognitive capacity to hold multiple contradictory realities in mind simultaneously. They built something that defeated 3 of the galaxy's greatest minds through sheer complexity. And he's using an app designed to help 8-year-olds find their way through a drawing of a hedge maze. The disconnect isn't just technological, it's philosophical. They see a tool meant for children's puzzles. He sees a problem-solving device. The council never considered that someone might approach their masterpiece with something so simple. The greatest minds never considered the simplest tool because they were too focused on the problem's scale, not its solution. They became so enamored with building the most complex possible test that they forgot to ask whether complexity itself was the point. They assumed that an impossible problem required an equally impossible solution, when sometimes the answer is just recognizing that the problem isn't as complicated as it looks. But how could a simple app possibly work on something as complex as the paradox maze? The aliens watch, some with dismissive amusement, others with growing concern. They're about to learn that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't more power. It's recognizing when you're overthinking things. The app wasn't going to solve the maze through brute force or dimensional manipulation. It was going to solve it by reducing the problem to its essential components, something the previous contestants never considered. So Tommy explains it like he's telling a friend about a cool game he figured out. The trick isn't to be everywhere at once, he says through a mouthful of cracker crumbs. That's like trying to watch every channel on TV simultaneously. You just get noise and headaches. Instead, you look for the path that doesn't change when you're not staring right at it. The maze was designed to shift and reconfigure under direct observation, punishing anyone who tried too hard to perceive it. But when you glance away briefly, some elements stay consistent, like how you can sometimes see something better out of the corner of your eye than when you look right at it. It's using your peripheral vision, but for mathematical patterns instead of physical objects. He reduces what the aliens considered a multidimensional perceptual problem to simple pattern recognition. The app on his phone wasn't solving 12 dimensions, it was just tracking what stayed the same across quick glances, building a map of consistent pathways. Where the Luxarian tried to observe everything and the calculator tried to solve everything, and the energy being tried to be everything, Tommy just noticed what remained reliable when nobody was paying full attention. The app identifies the path that doesn't flicker or shift between observations, and he simply follows that route. He walks through the maze not with intense concentration, but with a kind of relaxed attention that would probably get him in trouble in math class. He's not fighting the maze's design. He's using its own rules against it. The very thing that made it impossible for hyper-aware geniuses makes it solvable for someone approaching it with casual observation. The maze, designed to defeat hyper-awareness, yields to what looks like inattention. Where the others strained and struggled, Tommy ambles. Where they focused, he glances. The pathways that twisted into impossible knots for the previous contestants remain stable and clear for him. Because he's not trying to force them into stability, he's just noticing when they're already stable. The first impossible puzzle is solved not with force or complexity, but with a relaxed focus they never considered. The council watches, their various forms of expression shifting from confusion to something approaching dismay. They'd built something meant to require supreme intellectual effort, and here's a child solving it with what looks like minimal effort. He finishes the maze just as his juice box makes that final empty gurgle sound. The exit shimmers into existence not with a dramatic cosmic fanfare, but with a simple doorway that looks almost ordinary now that someone's actually used it properly. Tommy steps through, not with triumph, but with the satisfaction of someone who's completed a task and can now move on to more important things. The galactic definition of intelligence just got its first major update in centuries, and it happened while someone was sipping on a juice box. The viewing gallery is silent except for the crinkle of Tommy's snack bag as he checks for any remaining crackers. The council members look at each other, then at their holographic notepads, then back at the small human now dusting crumbs off his Star Wars shirt. They'd been so focused on building the perfect test of intellect that they never considered that intellect might not be what was needed. They created a lock that required not a more complex key but a different way of turning it. The paradox maze wasn't impossible. It was just waiting for someone who understood that sometimes you find the answer by not looking too hard. The energy being that was Commander Flux brightens slightly, then dims again like a light bulb trying to process a new idea. The crystalline judge's facets shift through colors that might indicate recalculation. The six-armed calculator has stopped muttering prime numbers and is just staring with all six eyes. Tommy looks from the solved maze to the silent aliens, then to Dr. Nova. That was kinda cool, he says. Like he's just finished a moderately interesting level in a video game. What's next? He takes one last loud sip from his empty juice box, completely unaware that he's just dismantled centuries of galactic intellectual tradition. The simplicity of his approach hangs in the air, more revolutionary than any complex solution could ever be. Next up is what the aliens called the Quantum Memory Palace. They described it as a repository containing every possible timeline and memory across the multiverse, a place where consciousness could theoretically access infinite versions of every moment that ever was or might be. The previous contestants had been completely overwhelmed by the sheer simultaneity of it all. Trying to process every memory at once left them mentally paralyzed, like trying to drink from a fire hose while standing in a flood. Tommy just shrugs when they explain this to him. He squints at the shimmering interface that supposedly contains infinity and says he bets it's not actually infinite, just really big, like how his dad says their internet storage is unlimited, but really means it's just more space than they'll probably ever need. The council members exchange glances that would be funny if they weren't so serious about their impossible test. He describes his method for organizing it using terms they've never heard before. He says it's like his computer files back home, where he has folders for different things. The aliens listen with expressions ranging from confusion to something approaching horror as he explains his system in terms so simple they barely seem to qualify as a system at all. Bad memories go in what he calls the deal with later folder, which is mostly empty because he's 9 and doesn't have that many bad memories yet. Besides, maybe that time he fell off his bike. Good memories go in the remember when I'm sad folder, which has things like birthday parties and that day his dog learned to catch treats. School stuff goes in the things I need to know for tests folder, though he admits he doesn't always remember to put things in there. Under his simple folder logic, the chaotic infinity begins to organize itself. What the aliens saw as an overwhelming simultaneity becomes a manageable filing system. The memory palace wasn't designed to be conquered through force or infinite capacity. It was waiting for someone to apply basic organizational principles. The architects had assumed anyone using it would need to comprehend everything at once, never considering that you don't need to comprehend something to organize it effectively. The council watches as the shimmering interface begins sorting itself according to Tommy's simple categories. Timelines settle into orderly sequences instead of overlapping chaos. Memories stop competing for attention and find their proper places. The quantum memory palace, designed to require godlike consciousness, yields to the logic of a child's computer file management system. Their theories of consciousness quietly unravel as they watch infinity become manageable through elementary school logic. They'd spent centuries developing complex models of how a mind might handle infinite information, and here's a human child solving it with the same approach he uses for organizing his homework. The energy being that was Commander Flux flickers in what might be amazement, or possibly just system shock from the simplicity of it all. The viewing gallery has gone completely silent. Delegates who were previously murmuring about betting odds now just stare at the organized interface. Some of them look like they're experiencing something between religious awe and an existential crisis. The carefully constructed intellectual hierarchy of the galaxy is collapsing under the weight of a filing system designed by a fourth grader. Tommy finishes organizing the memory palace and looks up from his work. He seems mildly pleased but not particularly impressed, like someone who's just cleaned their room and found it didn't take as long as they thought it would. He asks if there are any more puzzles because he's getting hungry again, and his mom packed him an extra juice box, but he's saving it for later. The council members look at each other, then at their now useless holographic notepads filled with complex equations and psychological models. They look at the perfectly organized quantum memory palace, then back at the small human now checking his pocket for any leftover crackers. The distance between their expectations and reality has never been wider or more amusing to observe. Dr. Nova sips her coffee from the sidelines, her expression saying she knew exactly how this would play out. She doesn't look triumphant, just satisfied like a teacher watching a student finally understand a concept that's been giving them trouble. The galactic definition of intelligence isn't just expanding, it's being completely rewritten by someone who thinks in terms of folders and snack times. To illustrate the scale, he uses his dad's analogy about space being like a pizza that never ends. Tommy explains this to the most advanced minds in the galaxy like he's sharing a fun fact at the dinner table. The council members listen with expressions that range from confusion to something approaching existential distress. They're used to complex mathematical models and quantum descriptions of infinity, not food-based comparisons. His dad says you don't try to eat the whole pizza at once. That would be impossible and probably make you sick. You just take it one slice at a time. Maybe two if you're really hungry, but definitely not the whole thing. That's how you deal with something infinite. You don't confront the entirety of it. You just handle the part that's right in front of you, the slice you can actually manage. The memory palace wasn't designed to be approached this way. The architects created it expecting users who would attempt to consume the whole pizza simultaneously, to hold all of infinity in their minds at once. They never considered someone might just take a single slice, deal with that, then move on to the next one. Their entire design philosophy assumed a level of cognitive consumption that nobody could actually achieve. This simple, slice-by-slice approach is what the architects never considered. They were so focused on building something that required infinite capacity that they forgot to design for finite, practical use. They created a system that only worked if you were a god, never considering that sometimes you just need to be someone who understands how to eat a pizza without making a mess. Tommy's approach reveals the fatal flaw in their godlike design assumptions. The memory palace begins organizing itself according to his slice method, timelines and memories settling into manageable portions instead of overwhelming simultaneity. What was designed as a test of infinite capacity becomes a simple matter of portion control. The council watches as their masterpiece of cognitive engineering yields to the logic of pizza consumption. The energy being that was Commander Flux flickers in a pattern that might indicate recalculation. The crystalline judge's facets shift through colors that could mean he's reconsidering several centuries of design philosophy. The six-armed calculator has stopped all movement entirely, just staring at the now organized memory palace with what might be the mathematical equivalent of astonishment. Meanwhile, Tommy's wondering if they have pizza here. He's moved from explaining his dad's analogy to considering whether alien pizza would have weird toppings, or if it would be basically the same as back home. His train of thought has jumped from cosmic scales to lunch possibilities, because that's how his brain works. Infinite concepts are interesting, but immediate concerns are more pressing. The viewing gallery delegates have stopped murmuring entirely. Some look like they're experiencing the intellectual equivalent of vertigo. Others seem to be having quiet revelations about their own approach to problem solving. The carefully constructed hierarchy of galactic intelligence isn't just shaking now, it's undergoing a complete structural reassessment based on pizza consumption methodology. Dr. Nova continues sipping her coffee from the sidelines, looking like someone who knew all along that the solution would involve either snacks or food analogies. She doesn't seem surprised that a child's understanding of portion sizes has solved what 3 galactic geniuses couldn't approach. If anything, she looks mildly amused that nobody else saw this coming. The memory palace now sits organized and manageable, a testament to the power of not trying to do everything at once. Tommy looks from the neatly sorted infinity to the silent council, then asks if there's maybe a vending machine or something nearby, because thinking about pizza has made him hungry. The distance between cosmic scale and human scale has never felt wider or more amusing to observe. The aliens are left to contemplate their design flaws while a 9-year-old thinks about pepperoni. They'd built tests for gods and forgotten to design for people. They'd created challenges that required infinite capacity, when what was needed was finite practicality. The solution wasn't more power, it was recognizing that some things aren't meant to be consumed whole. The last challenge is what they called the temporal riddle engine. It's the showpiece of their entire competition, the puzzle they saved for last because they considered it fundamentally impossible for any being without quantum consciousness. The interface shimmers with overlapping timelines, futures branching and collapsing, past rewriting themselves in real time. It looks less like a puzzle, and more like someone turned causality into a knot and then forgot where the ends were. It requires navigating multiple futures and pasts simultaneously, holding all possibilities in mind while deciding which path to take. The previous contestants failed here spectacularly. The Luxarian tried to observe every timeline at once and went dark. The calculator tried to compute all outcomes and short-circuited, the energy being tried to exist across all time streams and fizzled out. They designed this specifically to require the kind of consciousness nobody actually has. Tommy looks at the swirling mess of timelines and sees something completely different. He sees a messy week. Specifically, he sees the week he had last month when everything seemed to happen at once. He's got math homework that can't be started until after class on Monday, because the teacher hasn't explained the new unit yet. He's got a science project that can't be finished until Saturday, because that's when his mom said she'd take him to get poster board. There's a trip to the store somewhere in there and soccer practice, and he thinks maybe his grandma's visiting on Thursday. He doesn't see quantum states or temporal paradoxes. He sees scheduling conflicts. The temporal riddle engine was designed to be solved through supreme awareness of multiple realities. But Tommy approaches it like he's planning his week around when the store sells the best kind of juice boxes. He maps the dependencies backward, just like his mom showed him for planning school projects. You can't do the math homework until after Monday's class, so that block gets scheduled for Monday evening. The science project needs poster board from the Saturday store trip, so the finishing touches go after that. The store trip itself needs to happen when his mom isn't working, which according to her schedule is Saturday morning. He works through the temporal puzzle the same way he'd figure out when to do his chores around television shows he wants to watch. The solution emerges not through quantum awareness but through simple scheduling logic. The timelines that seemed chaotic and overlapping begin to settle into a coherent sequence. Futures stop branching wildly and start following cause and effect relationships. Pasts stop rewriting themselves and settle into a single consistent history. The engine wasn't designed to be solved this way. The architects assumed anyone attempting it would need godlike temporal perception, not basic organizational skills. A cheerful holographic ding signals his success, the sound utterly mismatched with the cosmic significance of what just happened. It's the kind of sound you'd hear when someone wins a minor prize at a carnival game, not when someone solves a puzzle designed to be fundamentally impossible. The temporal riddle engine now sits quiet and orderly. All its chaotic potential collapsed into a single straightforward timeline. The galaxy's definition of intelligence just got a complete rewrite in the time it takes. A Child to plan his week around snack availability. The council members stare at the now quiet interface, then at Tommy, then at each other. They look like people who just watched someone use a paperclip to fix a starship engine that teams of engineers had declared unfixable. The viewing gallery has gone completely silent. Some delegates look astonished. Others look like they're experiencing the intellectual equivalent of whiplash. The carefully constructed hierarchy of galactic intelligence isn't just collapsing now. It's been replaced by something nobody saw coming. Tommy looks from the solved puzzle to the silent aliens, then checks the time on his cracked phone. He mentions that he's probably missed afternoon cartoons by now, but maybe he can catch the rerun later. The distance between cosmic scale and human concerns has never felt wider or more revealing. Dr. Nova gives a small, satisfied nod from the sidelines. She doesn't look surprised, just pleased, like someone watching a student finally understand a concept that's been giving them trouble. The solution wasn't more complexity or power. It was recognizing that even the most impossible-seeming problems often yield to simple, practical approaches. The temporal riddle engine, designed to require quantum consciousness, has been solved through the same logic a child uses to schedule homework around television shows. The aliens are left to contemplate their assumptions about intelligence, while Tommy wonders what time the cartoons come on. They'd built a test for gods and forgotten that sometimes what you need isn't divinity, just someone who understands how to work within constraints. So the three alien geniuses are just staring. Their life's work, their entire understanding of cognition and intelligence lies in pieces around them like shattered crystal. They've spent centuries building theories about the nature of consciousness, developing complex models of what constitutes true intelligence, and designing tests that would separate the cognitive elite from the merely smart. And now a child with snack crumbs on his shirt and what looks like grape juice on his sleeve has solved their magnum opus in the time it takes to finish a juice box. They designed these puzzles to be impossible for anyone but a perfect version of themselves. The paradox maze required the Luxarians' multidimensional perception, but dialed up to an impossible degree. The quantum memory palace demanded the calculator's mathematical precision, applied to infinity itself. The temporal riddle engine needed the energy being's ability to exist across multiple states simultaneously. They built tests that only worked if you were them, but better, if you were the idealized, perfected version of what they aspired to be. They never designed for flexibility or practicality. They never considered that someone might approach their puzzles with a child's mind. Not a lesser mind, but a different kind of mind. One that doesn't see complexity as something to be mastered through force, but as something to be navigated through pattern recognition and practical organization. They confused complexity with intelligence, mistaking how hard something was to understand for how valuable it was. They treated spectacle as achievement, like magicians who care more about how impressive their tricks look than whether they actually fool anyone. Dr. Nova steps forward to articulate what just happened, and she has that "I told you so" look, but tempered with galactic diplomacy. She doesn't gloat or boast, just explains like a teacher helping students understand where their reasoning went wrong. She points out their fundamental error. They prized the puzzle's design over its solution. They fell in love with how impressive their creations were, how complex they could make them, how much they could strain even the greatest minds. They became so focused on building the perfect test of intelligence that they forgot to build something that actually tested intelligence rather than their particular narrow definition of it. The real lesson, she suggests, wasn't in the solving itself, but in what came after. The council members look from Dr. Nova to Tommy, who's now trying to get the last few crumbs out of his snack bag by shaking it upside down. They look at their shimmering, now-solved puzzles, then back at the small human who treated their life's work like a moderately interesting diversion between snacks. The cognitive dissonance is almost physical. You can see it in the way the energy being flickers uncertainly, in how the calculator's arms hang limp at his sides, in the way the Luxarian's facets cycle through colors that don't seem to mean anything coherent. They'd built a temple to their own intellect, and then wondered why only they could worship there. They'd created tests that measured how well someone could think like them, not how well they could think. And in doing so, they'd missed the entire point of testing intelligence in the first place. The solution wasn't to find someone who could play their game better. It was to realize their game was poorly designed from the start. But the real lesson was in the reward, in what happened when they offered their highest honor to someone who saw things differently. The council members are still processing this, their various forms of expression ranging from dawning understanding to stubborn denial. Some look like they're having revelations that will change their entire field of study. Others look like they'd rather pretend this never happened and go back to their carefully constructed intellectual comfort zone. Dr. Nova lets the silence hang there for a moment, allowing them to sit with the discomfort of being completely wrong about something they were absolutely certain about. It's the kind of lesson that can't be taught through explanation. It has to be experienced, has to settle into your understanding slowly, like rain soaking into dry ground. The three alien geniuses aren't just staring anymore. They're seeing, perhaps for the first time, that intelligence might be broader and more varied than they ever imagined. I mean, what do you give the being who just broke your system? The council presents the Cosmic Genius Medal, their highest honor, with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. The thing shimmers with captured starlight and probably costs more to manufacture than some small planet's annual budgets. They hold it out like they're offering the key to the universe itself, expecting awe, gratitude, maybe a tearful speech about the honor of receiving such recognition. Tommy looks at the shiny object, then back at the council members, then at the medal again. He doesn't seem impressed, just mildly curious, like someone examining an unusual rock they found in the backyard. He squints at it, then shakes his head slightly. The council members lean forward, waiting for the traditional acceptance speech, the humble gratitude, the acknowledgement of this supreme achievement. Instead, he negotiates. He says thanks, but he'd rather have a year's supply of sugar cereal. The aliens just stare, their various forms of expression freezing in place. The energy being stops flickering entirely, becoming a perfectly still glow. The calculator's arms hang motionless. The Luxarian's facets stop shifting colors, locked in a pattern of pure confusion. Specifically, he wants the kind with the marshmallows that change colors in milk. He describes how the pink ones turn the milk pink and the blue ones turn it blue. And if you mix them just right, you can make the milk turn a kind of purple that looks like space. He's more animated describing cereal than he was solving their impossible puzzles. The prestige of the galaxy is traded for a cardboard box of breakfast. The Cosmic Genius Medal, symbol of intellectual supremacy across 1,000 star systems, is rejected in favor of artificially colored marshmallows and processed grains. The council members look at each other, then at Dr. Nova, then back at Tommy, who's now explaining that the cereal has to be the kind with the rabbit on the box, not the bear, because the rabbit cereal has better marshmallows. The aliens are stunned beyond words, which for species that communicate through light patterns and mathematical equations is saying something. Their entire value system, built around intellectual achievement and cosmic recognition, has just been invalidated by a preference for breakfast carbohydrates. They'd prepared for this moment for centuries, designing the medal, writing the acceptance protocols, imagining how this supreme honor would be received. They never considered someone might prefer processed sugar. Humanity's rep just shrugs like this is completely normal behavior. She doesn't apologize or explain, just nods like Tommy's made a perfectly reasonable request. She's probably already calculating how much cereal a year's supply actually represents, and whether they'll need to arrange interstellar shipping. Value isn't in a medal. It's in what's useful, what brings joy. The aliens had spent so long valuing abstract recognition that they forgot to consider practical utility. They prized the symbol over the substance, the honor over the happiness it was supposed to represent. They never considered that someone might measure worth in colorful marshmallows rather than captured starlight. This was a lesson in intrinsic value they never saw coming. Their entire philosophy of reward and recognition was built around external validation, around proving one's worth to others. Tommy's preference for cereal over cosmic honors revealed a completely different value system, one based on personal enjoyment and practical benefit, rather than status and admiration. The Galactic Intellectual Summit will never be the same. The delegates in the viewing gallery aren't murmuring anymore. They're just watching, some with dawning understanding, others with complete bewilderment. The betting pools are completely abandoned, the concept of wagering on outcomes seeming suddenly trivial compared to the fundamental reassessment of values taking place. The council members slowly lower the medal, their movements hesitant like they're not quite sure what to do with it now. The glittering object seems less impressive somehow. its captured starlight seeming almost garish compared to the simple practical value of a good breakfast cereal. They look from the metal to Tommy, who's now asking if the cereal could be delivered to his house or if he'd have to pick it up somewhere. The distance between their concept of reward and his couldn't be wider. They'd built an entire system of intellectual honors based on what they thought mattered, never considering that what actually matters might be much simpler and more immediate. The galactic definition of value just got rewritten by someone who understands that a good breakfast is more important than a shiny medal. Dr. Nova steps forward to deliver what amounts to a killing blow to their entire old paradigm. She doesn't raise her voice or gesture dramatically, just speaks with the calm certainty of someone stating obvious facts that somehow got overlooked. The council members watch her, their various forms of expression shifting from confusion to something approaching understanding, though it clearly cost them some intellectual pride to get there. She explains that what they called ignorance wasn't a lack of knowledge at all. It was what her people call a beginner's mind. And it's actually a cognitive tool. It's not about knowing less. It's about being free from the assumptions that come with knowing too much in one narrow way. When you're not weighed down by preconceptions about how things should work, you can see how they actually work. This approach allows for clearer pattern recognition, because you're not filtering everything through existing frameworks. It enables practical organization, because you're not trying to fit things into systems that weren't designed for them. It facilitates adaptation because you're not married to methods that might be elegant in theory, but useless in practice. It values effectiveness over complexity, results over spectacle, solutions over ceremonies. Tommy didn't win because he was smarter in their terms. He won because their terms were flawed from the start. They'd built an entire system around measuring a very specific kind of intelligence, then declared it the only kind that mattered. It was like creating a test that only measured how well someone could juggle, then declaring anyone who couldn't juggle was unintelligent. He saw the problem, not the ceremony around it. Where they saw a grand intellectual challenge, he saw a maze to be navigated. Where they saw infinite memories, he saw files to be organized. Where they saw temporal paradoxes, he saw scheduling conflicts. He wasn't distracted by how impressive everything looked or how complex it seemed. He just looked for what worked. The resolution isn't dramatic, just quietly inevitable. Dr. Nova suggests that the next intelligence summit will include a broader range of problem solvers, with less emphasis on complexity for its own sake, and more on what actually produces results. Maybe they'll invite engineers instead of pure theorists, practical-minded beings who care more about whether something works than whether it looks impressive. Maybe they'll even include some children, since they seem to have useful perspectives on things. The council members don't argue or protest. They just absorb this, their various forms of expression settling into something like reluctant acceptance. The energy being glows with a steady, thoughtful light. The calculator's arms remain still, but his eyes show contemplation rather than confusion. The Luxarian's facets shift to a calm, neutral color pattern that might indicate reevaluation. And then, just like that, it was over. The grand competition that was supposed to showcase the pinnacle of galactic intelligence ended not with a triumphant ceremony, but with a quiet realization that they'd been measuring the wrong things all along. The delegates in the viewing gallery begin to disperse, some looking thoughtful, others already discussing how this changes their own research directions. The betting pools are completely forgotten, the concept of wagering on intelligence suddenly seeming shallow and misguided. Dr. Nova collects Tommy, who's now asking if they can stop for pizza on the way home. The Cosmic Genius Medal sits unattended on a pedestal, already looking slightly absurd in its ornate complexity. The council members remain in the chamber, not speaking, just contemplating the remains of their carefully constructed intellectual hierarchy. The galaxy's understanding of intelligence has shifted fundamentally, and it happened not through some grand philosophical debate, but through a series of simple solutions to problems that weren't as complex as everyone assumed. The beginner's mind turned out to be more powerful than the expert's certainty, and the universe would never think about thinking the same way again. So Tommy goes home, a hero without really knowing it. The aliens gave him glow-in-the-dark asteroid models that spin slowly when you tap them, and a coupon good for one free visit to any participating space station snack bar. His mom framed the coupon and put it on the fridge right next to his drawing of a rocket ship from first grade. The asteroid models ended up on his bookshelf between some Lego sets and a half-finished puzzle. Meanwhile, light years away, the aliens are left to slowly, painfully rewrite their textbooks. Their entire understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and problem-solving has become obsolete overnight. Professors who've taught the same theories for centuries now have to stand in front of their classes and explain that everything they've been teaching might be fundamentally wrong. Graduate students who've spent years memorizing complex, cognitive models watch their research. Proposals get rejected with notes about reconsidering basic assumptions. Their carefully constructed hierarchy of intelligence lies in pieces. The Luxarians are re-evaluating whether multidimensional perception is actually useful or just showy. The Arithmetic Collective is questioning whether infinite calculation ability matters if it can't solve basic problems. The Voltaic Confederation is having existential debates about whether pure consciousness needs to incorporate practical thinking. It's a quiet systemic collapse of everything they thought they knew about how minds work. Back on Earth, Tommy's life goes on exactly as before. His little sister is still better than him at video games, and she teases him about his space coupon every time she gets a higher score. He settles in to play after school, the cosmic medal he traded for colored marshmallows completely forgotten. The cereal arrived in a big cardboard box that took up half the pantry, and his mom makes him eat a piece of fruit with it so it's not just sugar for breakfast. The universe is now slightly more humble than it was before. Delegates who attended the summit return to their homeworlds with stories that sound like jokes but aren't. The betting pools have been dissolved. The holographic notepads filled with centuries of assumptions are being archived as historical curiosities. There's talk of forming a new committee to study what intelligence actually means, with broader membership and less emphasis on theoretical complexity. The most profound solutions can come from the most unlikely places, often from someone who just wanted a snack. The aliens had looked for answers in increasingly complex theories and powerful technologies, never considering that the solution might be in a child's approach to problem-solving. They'd built systems that required godlike abilities when what was needed was basic practicality. Tommy doesn't think about the competition much, except when he eats the cereal and remembers the funny-looking aliens. He's more concerned with homework and video games and whether his soccer practice got rescheduled. The glow-in-the-dark asteroids sometimes cast cool patterns on his ceiling at night, but he usually falls asleep before he can watch them for long. The galactic intellectual community will take years to fully process what happened. Some species embrace the new perspective quickly, while others cling to their old ways despite the evidence. A few particularly stubborn professors continue teaching their original theories, adding footnotes about anomalous results from the human incident that their students quietly mock behind their backs. The next intelligence summit is already being planned, with very different parameters. Instead of impossible puzzles, they're considering practical problems that actual civilizations face. Instead of hyper-specialized geniuses, they're inviting engineers, teachers, and even some children. There's talk of including a snack bar with Earth-style cereal, though the logistics of interstellar milk delivery are proving complicated. The universe learned that day that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't more power, it's recognizing when you're overcomplicating things, and that a child's curiosity, fueled by snack time motivation, can outperform centuries of specialized intellectual development. The end. You know, your brain isn't so different from Tommy's. It wasn't designed in a lab or optimized for theoretical perfection. It evolved through millions of years of practical problem solving. Our ancestors weren't solving abstract equations. They were finding paths through dense forests, remembering where the good berries grew and figuring out how to avoid predators while tracking dinner. That evolutionary history left us with cognitive tools optimized for real-world effectiveness, not theoretical elegance. Human cognition developed for practicality, not abstract perfection. We're wired to find patterns in chaos, to organize information into usable categories, to solve immediate problems with whatever tools are available. This makes us uniquely suited to cut through unnecessary complexity when we encounter it. Where other species might see an insurmountable intellectual challenge, we see a puzzle to be solved with whatever's handy, whether that's advanced mathematics or a cracked smartphone with a maze app. We don't see a 12-dimensional maze. We see a path to be found. We don't perceive infinite memories. We see files to be sorted into folders. We don't encounter temporal paradoxes. We see scheduling conflicts to be worked out. Our strength isn't in raw processing power or the ability to hold infinite data in mind simultaneously. It's in flexible application, the ability to look at a problem and ask what works here, rather than what's the most impressive approach. This is the hidden advantage we bring to a universe obsessed with specifications and theoretical limits. Other species measure intelligence by how many calculations per second you can perform, or how many dimensions you can perceive. We measure it by whether you can actually solve the problem with the resources available. It's the difference between admiring how complex a lock is and actually figuring out how to open it. Sometimes the most advanced tool is the simplest idea, applied without the baggage of expectation. The aliens assumed their puzzles required godlike abilities because that's what they valued. They were impressed by their own creation's complexity. Tommy approached them with a beginner's mind, free from assumptions about how things should be solved, focused only on what actually worked. He didn't bring more power to the problem. He brought better questions. Your brain contains that same capability. It's not about being the smartest in theoretical terms. It's about being effective in practical terms. When you face what seems like an impossible problem, you might not need more complexity or power. You might just need to step back, forget how impressive the problem looks, and ask what would actually work to solve it. The solution might be simpler than anyone expected, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to approach it without preconceptions, which is a pretty powerful thing to remember when you're staring at your own version of a 12-dimensional maze. The universe is full of problems that seem impossible until someone looks at them with fresh eyes and asks the right simple questions. Your brain, evolved for practicality and pattern recognition, contains exactly that ability to cut through complexity and find the straightforward path that everyone else overlooked because they were too busy admiring how complicated everything looked. So what's the lesson for the rest of the galaxy? They have homework now, and it's not more complex equations or advanced theoretical models. Their assignment isn't to build bigger supercomputers or develop more intricate puzzles. It's something far more challenging for beings who've spent centuries convinced of their own intellectual superiority. Their real homework is to learn humility, to recognize that intelligence comes in many forms, not just the kind that looks impressive in a laboratory. They need to value different kinds of minds, not just the specialists and theorists, but the practical problem solvers, the pattern recognizers, the beings who approach challenges without preconceptions about how they should be solved. It's to design tests for solvers, not for show. The competition wasn't really about finding intelligence, it was about displaying the architect's own cleverness. They built puzzles that showcased how complex they could make things, not how effectively they could identify actual problem-solving ability. The next time they create a challenge, it should measure whether someone can actually solve problems, not whether they can appreciate how difficult the designers made them. It's to remember that a solution is a solution, no matter how it's found. They became so focused on how answers were derived that they forgot why they were asking the questions in the first place. Elegant mathematics and multidimensional perception are impressive, but they're worthless if they don't actually produce working solutions. A child with a smartphone app solved what their greatest minds couldn't, and that should tell them something about where true value lies. And maybe they should stock up on cereal with color-changing marshmallows. Because you never know when you might need to motivate a different kind of problem solver. The universe is full of beings who respond better to practical rewards than abstract honors, who care more about what works than what looks impressive. The next competition will look very, very different. Instead of impossible puzzles in glittering chambers, they might host practical problem-solving challenges with real-world applications. Instead of hyper-specialized geniuses, they might invite engineers, teachers, artists, and yes, probably some children. They might even include mothers who've spent years negotiating bedtimes and homework assignments. Because if you can handle that, you can probably handle most galactic-scale problems. It might even have a snack table, because they're learning that cognitive function doesn't happen in a vacuum. Sometimes the best ideas come when you're not straining to have them. When you're taking a break, having a snack, letting your mind work in the background instead of forcing it to perform. Intelligence isn't a hierarchy with one type of mind at the top and all others below. It's a toolkit with different tools for different jobs. Sometimes you need a precision instrument and sometimes you need a simple hammer. The most useful tool is often the one you overlooked because it seemed too simple, too obvious, too commonplace to be valuable. They're learning that a child's curiosity can be more powerful than a legion of theoretical physicists, that practical thinking can outperform pure calculation, that sometimes the most advanced solution is recognizing when you're making things unnecessarily complicated. The galaxy is beginning to understand that intelligence isn't about how impressive you look while solving problems. It's about whether you actually solve them. But that's a story for another time. When they've had time to do their homework and come back with a better understanding of what intelligence actually means. The universe is full of lessons, and this was just one of them. A reminder that sometimes the teacher comes in unexpected packages, often with snack crumbs on their shirt and simple solutions in their pocket. The galaxy learned that day that a child's curiosity is more powerful than a legion of arrogant intellects. Remember, the next time you face an impossible problem, maybe the solution isn't more complexity but a simpler perspective. Strip away the ceremony. Ignore how impressive the challenge looks and just look for what works. Sometimes the answer is right there, hidden behind layers of overthinking and self-importance. And maybe bring a snack, because apparently, problem-solving works better when you're not taking everything so seriously. Sometimes the universe's deepest truths come with juice box in hand.